Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining APQC's webinar, Transforming a Global HR Function. As a reminder, audio is available through your computer or dial-in lines, and all attendee lines are muted. You can submit questions using the Q&A tool. As you can see, there's an example on the right of your screen. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them here, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a copy of the slides and the recording in a few days. I would now like to pass the presentation off to the Human Capital Management Principal Research Lead, Alyssa Tucker.
Well, welcome to APQC's May Human Capital Management webinar on the topic of HR transformation. HR transformation is one of the most common topics in my discussions with APQC members. I'm hearing from them that they're pursuing HR transformation in order to deliver a consumer-grade employment experience, to minimize manual and administrative work for HR, managers, and employees, to offer timely and data-driven decision support to business leaders, and to provide heightened security for workforce information. So while their objectives are clear, organizations are having many questions about how to carry out their HR transformations in a way that helps them achieve the intended results. So our speaker today will be illuminating the how-to aspect of HR transformation based on her organization's journey. Our speaker is Maryjo Charbonnier. She is the Chief Human Resources Officer of Wolters Kluwer. Wolters Kluwer is a global provider of professional information, software solutions, and services for clinicians, nurses, accountants, lawyers, and tax, finance, audit, risk, compliance, and regulatory sectors. Wolters Kluwer had annual revenues of 4.6 billion euros in 2020, employs more than 19,000 people worldwide, and is headquartered in the Netherlands. Maryjo is responsible for the design and implementation of all human resources strategies, policies, and processes throughout the corporation. Previously, she served as the Vice President of Talent Management for PepsiCo Foods Americas. During her tenure at PepsiCo, Maryjo led HR teams in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. She earned her BA at Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and received her MBA at the Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. So it's my pleasure to welcome Maryjo.
Thanks, Alyssa, and thanks, everyone. And I will say to your introduction on HR transformation, yes, all those things we were trying to do and a few more. I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon to share with you our journey on the HR transformation at Wolters Kluwer. And we've really sort of built this presentation for all of you today as a kind of grab and go to pull out things out of here if you're on a transformational journey. You may not find the whole thing useful, but I'm hoping you'll find one or two slides that are great sort of takeaway shareable moments in this presentation. So what am I going to talk about since we've been on a transformation journey for several years now? As you heard a little bit about us, Wolters Kluwer is 180 plus years old, and I like to joke this is my 180-year-old startup assignment, because you'll see we were very fragmented in how we did things with no central data repository in HR. So how did we build a business case? How did we kind of pave our own way? What was our journey on the transformation? How did we pace ourselves over the last almost 5 years? And what have we learned out of that I can share with you? So hopefully some things in here are relevant and interesting. I'm going to take about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll leave time for Q&A along the way. So Alyssa's great introduction carried a lot of this, but I think some relevant points for you is I would recommend really trying to ground your HR transformation back into your business strategy. That will help, and it sounds so obvious. You'll see how we kind of did the link and label to that along the way. But with 19,000 employees in 46 different countries, and our countries range from the largest country in the United States of 9,000 down to employee size, country size with only 10 employees, cracking the code on the complexity we had and the sort of long tail of small countries was important. As well as, we had been a legacy publishing business, and we were moving more and more into technology and software businesses. So changing the types of talent we could attract and retain and develop became central in terms of a rallying cry to our business leaders, given what we had been wasn't what we were becoming. And the CEO laid out, Nancy McKinstry, kind of 3 strategies at that point in time, which was to grow our expert solutions. Those are those software businesses, to advance deep domain expertise, right? That's kind of what our secret sauce is we put a lot of experience and professional information at other professionals' fingertips. So how do we cultivate, an incredible explosion of knowledge? And then we had been a legacy holding company shifting to a more operating company. So many shared services, including HR, were just sort of 20 years behind the time. So how are we going to drive operational agility to fuel our growth? So those were the things we kept coming back to during the transformation to link and label. Okay, so let me move on to the next part here. I'm a big lover of Berson's maturity models. And this was, I used to say to our C-suite organization, if you only had 1 page to take away from our HR strategic plan, this was the 1 page. We were really at the beginning of this, what I'll call level 1 maturity, real foundational HR. We had compliance in place, many fragmented country teams. Even within a country, HR teams were very fragmented and had different payrolls, different practices. And so things were very siloed, and there were many standalone programs, but we needed to move up the maturity model in an orderly fashion. First passing through the phase of sort of enterprise practices, where you start to globalize key things like performance management, and then into more global HR talent solutions. And our goal was really to get to level 3 when we started in 2016. By 2020, we did get there, although it's still a little uneven in some parts on our maturity model, I'll say that. But this was sort of a handy 1-pager along the way to simplify what we were trying to do to the business. Okay, so in that link and label back to the business priorities, you can really see that if our business priority was to really grow our software businesses, those expert solutions as we call them, that meant we had to help the business lead a lot of change. And the implication for that was that we needed to be reshaping the work and the workforce, focused on our most critical talent segments, and enable our leaders to manage change, drive engagement, which back in 2016 was the first time we were doing engagement surveys, and ensure PICO costs, or that's what our sort of personnel cost line is called, making sure that was sustainable and not growing faster than our revenue line. Our second sort of link and label to that business strategy around managing our domain expertise was if we were going to advance that, we had to advance our talent to help them build skills and careers. From the first engagement survey work we did, that was the category we were kind of farthest behind on, and became a rallying cry for why were we doing the HR transformation in addition to the business change. So we said to them, we want to thoughtfully mature our talent and rewards programs and processes into globally integrated solutions where needed, and leaving local solutions where needed. And then lastly, an easy link and label to the driving operational agility into delivering HR efficiency and effectiveness. And we needed to create a real financial model because we needed about 20 million euro of investment to do the HR transformation. And that's a lot of money to task our leaders with or our businesses with. So we were one hand doing an HR transformation, and in another way trying to create a financial glide path through benefits, pension plans, and other things that we were the financial sort of stewards of, if you will, to see what could we do to re-engineer those to offset, while maintaining employee value, to offset the incremental burden on the organization during the transformation to fund it. Because we simply couldn't exist in 19,000 employees. And if you know anything about software businesses, they grow and scale globally. So having an HR organization that was built to do everything specifically in country, and even in country, 5 different ways within a country, as we had, more and more global businesses with more and more global teams, it was just really inefficient for managers and leaders to get the, the basic transactional pieces to support their people done efficiently with us. So since we were looking at a really, really big change, I said to my boss, Nancy, at the time, I need to ask you for a really, really big check, but don't give it to me. because I don't know that the team and I are capable, and I was a brand new CHRO coming in externally at this point in time. Let us start with just the easy stuff. And if we get that right, we'll go on to do the harder stuff and ask you for the big check. So we did sort of on our way, and this is one thing I would recommend, is kind of break your change down into manageable chunks to kind of test, learn, go on to the next chunk. So what was the first big chunk we did? We actually had to come back later and redo. But we leveraged success factors to stand up essentially our first global database of employee information, kind of 25 fields of data to create a record in success factors to run performance management, talent planning, and learning. Because that's the difference between success factors and Workdays. You didn't have to buy their core platform, which we weren't ready for. That did mean we hot-wired a database together every 2 weeks, which was really clunky, so it didn't refresh. It wasn't accurate except for 1 point every 2 weeks. But what it really allowed us to do was to demonstrate to ourselves and to the organization that we could crack the code on complexity. Because we literally at the time had 28 different performance management processes running at all different times of the year. Talent management had only been introduced sort of the year before in 2015, and it was being done on paper binders. And we had 9 different learning management systems that only covered 10% of employees for the cost of one. So it allowed us to really understand our data. I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But really prove that, hey, if we were going to become a software company, we could use software as a service to serve internal customers like our employees, and that the HR team was capable of, for the first time ever, landing a massive global project on time, on budget, on scope. Now, what did we learn after we could see our data? Well, we knew we had about 25 fields of data for 19,000 employees. And to do a big HCM, you need about 150 fields of data to run something like a Workday core HR system. And all of a sudden, we could see now we had, back then 18,000 employees. We have more today. We payrolled them through 61 different payroll providers that were all different vendors. We tracked data when we were uploading the data into SuccessFactors. We were tracking it out of 22 different source systems that range from a fairly sophisticated but decrepit version of PeopleSoft down to an Excel spreadsheet in Japan. We had over 25 different job architecture systems, and there was no globalized P&L, general ledger, or cost center. So if we were going to take on streamlining payroll, which we needed to do, we were going to have to not only crack our code, crack the finance team's code on the complexity. And when we map that all down into, okay, how many points of conversion did we need to manage? It was 120 to 1 when we looked at the intersection of payroll system, country, and HR team that was in charge of those things. And it was a pretty daunting task, and I was considering not asking for the big check. But sometimes you find out that, inspiration comes in the strangest of places. So like many HR teams out there, we host the annual leadership meeting with all the top leaders of the company. I think we had a speaker that year, Daniel Broboff, and he said in the middle of that, and he was talking about moonshots, and he said sometimes the only option left is the hardest thing to be done. That's what's left is easy, and it's not the right option. That sometimes the moonshot is the only option left, and as a leader, you just have to accept that. And more importantly, you have to find a way to rally your team or your nation to do what looks like almost the impossible. And I thought to myself, yeah, that reflects my desk. The only thing left is really to get out of all of this complexity, and we needed to build the business case and began to go for our moonshot. Now that looks like a really romantic picture. Here's what our moonshot felt like. It felt like a giant ball of string that we really were struggling to figure out how do we begin to unravel all the ball of string into things we could actually get done, project manage, make sure we stayed on time, on budget for the business on. So we started to talk about this slide that I love, which is we had lots of puzzles to solve and very few problems. Think about what's a puzzle. Things where a recipe is essential. It doesn't take a lot of expertise, but some, and it's kind of a known thing to unravel. So lots of companies have consolidated payroll or job architectures or moved to an HCM system. We ought to be able to think about those. While they might have felt like a mess, they were not so complicated if we really sort of started to break them down and to work through them a piece at a time. So how did we do that? One is sort of beginning to be the roadshow of advertising and preparing the organization for change and making sure we as an HR team had a really clear picture of what that future was going to look like. What did our moonshot look like? Which was to put together 3 pieces of technology. So introduce Workday and eventually sunset everything we'd put on SuccessFactors. Move all payrolls with ADP and introduce a piece of technology called PeopleDoc, which is our case management, employee file system, and portal. And bring those together, but not only bring those together, really change the way HR worked into a new operating model to deliver all those benefits, plus a few more that Alyssa mentioned, in terms of a contemporary candidate experience, secure platforms, more efficient and effective HR, because our cost structure was all out of whack when you looked at the benchmark data, reducing manager and employee time spent on transactional information. And really, I outlawed saying manager employee self-service. Nobody likes to serve themselves, so we call it manager and employee direct access. You can put lots of information at people's fingertips. So what did our business case look like? Here's a grab and go if you need it, in terms of what were we saying to the business. If you give us 20 million euro, we'll commit to giving you these things back, which was to bring HR's ownership costs in line with benchmarks, to avoid unscalable investment we needed to make on deteriorating HR platforms. There was no use upgrading anything in country because we needed to lift and shift into a global model. Deliver the opportunity, and we tried to cost it out in terms of the time we could save managers and employees. Enhance enterprise governance, especially with GDPR going into effect. There were heavy fines if we had issues. And really drive an overall improved employee and candidate experience. Really trying to be out there to sell the business case. As I like to say, HR transformations don't go on forever, but they sure feel like they do while they do. So preparing the organization that the money would pay back and that this was going to take some time. We needed to be very focused so we didn't run over budget, and setting those kind of expectations. So here's another slide we used that was talking about the journey we were on. And kind of beginning to modularize the change. So we started with SuccessFactors. That was sort of a big global, if you will, pilot to find all of our data, see if we could do something with a low risk. Beginning to get the HR operating model introduced, because what the other tip I would say is you really have to change the way HR works before you introduce the new technology, not after, because otherwise you don't get the benefit of the new technology. Beginning to shop that business case around, make sure there was really good buy-in. We launched the portal first in the US, then attached it to Workday, then around the world launched core HR in Workday, compensation and recruitment along with the portal all globally. Along the way, we were changing payrolls out country by country. When we launched Workday, we took a little moratorium, kind of 90-day and a 90, 120-day moratorium on payroll changes so we get focused on the Workday implementation. Then we came back and moved everything we put into SuccessFactors into Workday. So the organization had to be patient while they had just learned how to figure out how to do their performance management in SuccessFactors. We told them, no, don't get used to it. We're moving it into Workday. So we moved performance management, then we moved talent planning, and then we moved learning. That took us a little while later. We didn't get that done until this year. Because in the meantime, we were also launching a global job architecture live with Workday. We'd never had a single job architecture. And we were introducing something called, once we had the global job architecture in the global rewards framework, because we were coming in to put in common ways that we looked at and pulled that market data to look at salary range and competitive pay. which we started to introduce this year, late last year in 2020. And then the CRM went live this year. So you can see it's been a long journey. We've had to take the organization with us on that and keep them patient. And I'm happy to take any questions on that along the way. Some of you may be wondering now, how did we change our HR operating model? And that was really sort of having some frameworks, and this is what we talked to the team about. There's no one perfect way to organize HR, and that probably by the time we got the model perfect, it'd be time to change it. But what were we really trying to do with a company like ours and the employee base like ours in so many distributed countries was really trying to find what's that right balance point between global and local? What's that right balance point between its standard versus its custom or boutique? We knew we were going to have to change how we worked in HR, both in terms of the process and the technology and the work itself, and that the technology ought to offer a simplified user experience, not only for employees, not only for managers, but for HR too, because their jobs were a whole lot of email without a lot of right data, which was frustrating to the HR teams. So we shifted from a truly local for local country model into a global operating model that's got kind of 4 different teams we talk about, and broke apart many of our HR jobs that were hybrid and did many, many things, making it very frustrating for our HR teams to have really dedicated, move out of a generalist model into dedicated line of business roles, dedicated COEs. When I took the job, we didn't have a head of global, we'd never had a head of global rewards, we never had a head of technology, a head of comp. All of the basic COEs didn't exist in this sort of really local for local model. We then created teams that were very dedicated in country to what we called market HR, that were in terms of really applying all of the local expertise, work console management, that we needed to figure out how do we balance that global and local equation. And then our HR service delivery teams, which included HRIS, service delivery, and payroll, that are really around scale and simplicity and how could we get the work done consistently with continuous improvement, better, faster, cheaper. So they're happy to talk about those, and then those each 4 corners represent a critical agenda that needed to be driven, whether it's an enterprise governance agenda, the business agenda, the geographic agenda, or the one around cost and efficiency. Here's a little bit, this probably looks familiar. Maybe some of you had a similar experience that, I had rolled out Workday in a prior job before, and it really doesn't work so well if you don't get the job architecture right and simplified. And I was determined to do that better and different this time. So we had really 2 simultaneous go lives that were just well, 3 simultaneous go lives that were massive in the middle of this journey, which is we launched the global career framework, which meant before, as we were getting ready for the Workday go live, we were reevaluating 19,000 jobs. And fitting them into one career job architecture, migrating to one job leveling process, and harmonizing titles around the world, while we used Workday to say, hey, your managers had a conversation with you, now open up Workday and you can see your new job level get confirmed. That's how we got eyeballs on Workday day 1, while we were launching the portal simultaneously. So if something was wrong versus what you expected, you had one way to ask us a question about it. So I wouldn't do that again, to be honest. It was an overwhelming amount of work in the HR team, but we really just didn't have a choice in terms of, I think, the complexity, the budgets, the time frames we had. But doing that much at once might not be something I'd take so lightly again. So here's what it looked like in terms of kind of the schedule of the launch, and that sort of Workday, the global career framework, and that portal already went sort of live together. That country by country payroll kept going over 3 years as we converted and harmonized each in-country payroll. And we had some countries that might have 400 people in them and 8 different payroll vendors. So those happened sort of as standalone conversions along the way, while we kept kind of the BAU trains running, as we were constantly changing out, processes on that. So my tips for then managing change, which is if you can figure out how to pay your own way to take the tax off the business, I would really encourage that, because it is a long time, and we were relentless on, we're going to do the HR transformation and nothing else but core BAU. And then not having the tax that the business needed to pay on top of that definitely gave us, I think, a level, they were more patient given that they didn't have to pay for it. I think you have to start all change first within the HR function because you need the HR teams to go out and role model the new ways, the new tools to the business. You have to really be thoughtful about structuring stakeholder buy-in. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a page. And we had a principle that we were always trying to give the leadership level, sort of the executive level of the company, 6 months of visibility. We were always communicating to them, we're going to commit to give you 6 months of visibility out and prepare you for what's changing. Sometimes that's distracting for employees. They don't need that much visibility because sometimes not a lot was changing at the employee level, more at the people manager level. So employees might have had 1 to 3 months of visibility depending on the change. So let me talk a little bit about how we managed the change. We developed a set of guiding principles that we used as we went into design workshops with our partners and vendors on this. Linked a lot to our value and to our business strategy. I won't read them all here, but I think, one of our core values is aim high and deliver. And we knew we had one of the largest technology projects ever funded in Wolters Kluwer history, and all eyes and bets were on us. And we did deliver it on time, on budget, on scope with the expected business case outcome. But we really had to commit to that as a team and say, hey, this is where we're going to make our mark. While we were doing the design workshops, really kind of encouraging the HR teams to don't think about how it works today, fast future forward into the new HR model, design it for the future for your new role, which meant at the leadership level in HR, people had to kind of know where they landed before we even started for them to be able to kind of get buy-in into the process. And when in doubt, always drive role clarity. If there's a choice to be made in HR, don't have overlapping work and things, multiple roles doing multiple work, because we weren't going to hit the efficiency targets we needed to hit in that case. It's hard but true. Drive for standard configuration as much as you can take out of the box from the vendors. Don't customize it unless it's really, really critical to your business. And in our case, we have a very, professional white collar workforce that's not seasonal at all in nature. And I was like, there is nothing we need to customize. We should be able to run everything out of the box because we're not that unique, even if we think we're special. Focus on the end customer, which in our case was the people manager, and start in HR first with the change and then move out from there. Now, that's a pretty busy slide. When we went out to talk to leaders, we kept those messages simple, and I'll share a page for that in just a second. What we were really structured about was how we managed the change in terms of what role did weekly project teams who had very clear charters play. How did they come up into what we called the project management team? How did that HR project management team interact and get input and buy-in and work key issues from our IT teams, our legal teams, our finance teams, and our control and audit teams, particularly relevant on the payroll conversion side. Those working councils led up to sort of what we called the extended HR program board, which was really our central governing mechanism. And then that HR board took things into the HRLC and up and out into the business leaders and then down again through that. So I would say making sure you have a really clear way you manage change and are thoughtful about how you make sure you've got every stakeholder mapped on your game board and a forum you get their input in from. And incredibly important when you're doing payroll and HR transformation work is the finance partnership. And I could talk a little bit more if there's questions on that on how we organized it. When it came to talking to leaders, we really had written a script, and I won't drain this slide, but these were the key messages we came back to over and over again in terms of integrating the business strategy you heard me talk about, but our values in terms of what we were doing as well, and making sure the HR team really had the script tight. Now, you wouldn't have seen this slide travel through the organization much because it's kind of busy and overwhelming for our culture. What you would have heard us talk to leaders about looked something like this, which was we kept coming back to the 4 things you need to know right now. And then we'd kind of water dripped them what they just needed to know at those kind of checkpoints where we were saying, hey, for the next 6 months, the things you need to know are. And then they became sort of very simple frameworks we talked to leaders about. So in terms of what did we learn? You can see it's been a series of successive changes that we've managed, one building upon another. What I would tell you is that was the picture of what I thought I was going to be looking like in 2020. Our moon chat was over. I was kicked back and celebrating, and then the pandemic hit. And that is not at all what my offices look like, or my home offices look like at all. As what I would say is I'm so glad we had the HR transformation behind us before the pandemic hit, or at least the large bulk of it behind us. Because for us to move from work from home, given that the HR teams had really integrated and acted and were on common tools and platforms for us to support the organization differently, we were already so virtual and teaming well so globally. It was really a simple move for us. And the new technology was instrumental in us being able to support employees during the pandemic. One basic thing, we could find all the employees. We already knew who was working from home and who wasn't. We could target communications out on our platforms and push out communication instantly because we'd been doing that for some period of time. And because the HR teams were used to already in the new operating model, thinking about, hey, what can we do locally? What can we do regionally? What can we do globally, and moving from that local model backwards and forwards all day long, them figuring out how to get through the pandemic and what to adapt and what to keep the same was sort of like second nature to us at that point. What I would tell you is now, okay, it's 2021, we've got all the big transformational pieces done, and looks like, we're still managing things on the pandemic, but that there's maybe light on that horizon. I would say we are knee deep in process improvement and more process improvement. What surprised me is even after all the work we did to globalize processes and to figure out how they would work, you get it live and you still have a lot to learn and a lot to simplify in the organization. We're really focused on driving manager capability with the new tools. We rolled probably so much at them at once. We need to now come back and not build new, but deepen the learning we have on the things, and also ensure managers are really using the tools versus the HR teams continuing to do the work for the HR managers. And right now it's just beautiful because we have so much data, but I think it's a learning curve for the HR organizations on really how to drive data to insight to action. Now that we can see so much better data, whether it's on employees and turnover patterns, service levels out to the business. It's just a continual learning curve as we shift into a much more sort of operational, kind of coming out of transformational era into an operational era. So with that, I've talked for about 25 minutes. That's the end of my slides. So I'm happy to take questions and I'll need Alyssa to come back and remind me how we do the questions. There she is. She's going to help me. And I'm happy to answer any audience questions that are out there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maryjo. I really appreciate how you've kind of pulled the curtain back for us to look in kind of inside, at your journey and the different steps that were involved. So just thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. We're already getting great feedback in our chat. So thank you. And I do already have some questions from our listeners, so I'll get to those, but I do want to encourage our listeners, if you have questions for Maryjo, please go ahead and use the chat feature to submit your questions. I'll be happy to facilitate those and ask them of Maryjo. So why don't we jump in? Our first question was around privacy, and how did you handle privacy concerns so that you were ensuring compliance given your global reach? How did you keep up with the different privacy jurisdictions?
Sure, great question. So one of those many work streams that I didn't talk about was the data work stream, and that was probably the single most complex work stream we had because we were loading data into Workday in a series of cycles. to test it, to scrub it, to clean it, to get those 150 fields right. And then you're doing the role security in software as a service. So who, what can I see? What can I do? Who can I see? And coming back over and over again to that, because in that data work stream was our legal counsel and our chief privacy officer were a part of what we were doing, to making sure we were clear on what the rules and the regs were, and also making sure we were talking to the works councils and having all of the right sort of paperwork in place on data sharing across the organization. That probably was one of the single most complex work streams, but it was actively managed as a work stream with a leader and then the right players involved in sorting through that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Our next question is if you could speak a little bit more about your HR operating model. This listener is wondering if you could talk about what your HR business partners do, if their work is more data-driven talent consulting versus more traditional HR, which would be like employee relations and compensation.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say we're still on the journey. What we envision those line of business partner jobs to be isn't quite where we're at yet today. That's an ongoing part of the process improvement, is that there's still work in those line of business jobs that needs to get structured, standardized, automated, and cleaned and out. Because the real legacy of HR in Wolters Kluwer prior to the transformation was all generalists. So everybody did everything. And so we were breaking that generalist model into much more distinct roles. So let's say a country might have had a country HR team where maybe 5 or 6 people covered a lot of ground together. We were saying, hey, one person, maybe 2 out of the 6 become dedicated line of business partners into those BUs that sat in that country. Maybe 2 or 3 people became what I would call kind of HR operations, where they were doing compensation, benefits, transactional service delivery, and payroll. And they really, those teams, that's what we call market HR, they really led the transformation because we were very purposeful that we were never going to get through this with our business leaders with us if the teams all stayed in that old model, because everybody would have to be focused on the transformation and we wouldn't be able to stay connected to the businesses. So that's what I mean about we changed the model in HR before we even started to change the technology, so that those line of business leaders were aware of the technology. They were changes. They were certainly carrying messages and preparing the way on change management, but they weren't sweating the project plan every day, because that was our market HR teams. And then breaking out payroll, who was sweating those payroll conversions, and then breaking out in those country teams recruiting, because our recruiting teams had absolutely no technology they were working with. They were really inefficient, and that's probably one of the more cutting edge places in HR today. And we needed to gather up the recruiting resources because we had so much change to take the recruiting teams through. Plus, we were having unprecedented demand in terms of hiring at this period, that we needed to better divide and conquer. So hopefully that gives you a sense of that question. Our goal was to get line of business jobs to be more strategic, less tactical. I'm not sure we're there yet. I know we're not there yet. They tell me that. Because what happened along the way, and like I mentioned this, but I'll connect the dots better, is I don't think we drove as much manager direct access / self-service. So our HR line of business is still keying a lot of transactional work and data change because it didn't shift out of HR into the managers yet. So that's a piece that we're working on to get kind of that element out. As well as you didn't hear me talk about, besides the global career framework and getting everybody on a common job level and a common salary range structure, we didn't yet crack the code on. We have over 450 management bonus plans. So there's just a ton of complexity out there on compensation, design, and administration that's sitting, particularly the admin that's sitting with our line of business partners, that needs to get moved over time as well.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Our next question is about your performance management system. This listener would like to know a little bit more about how you assess performance. Are you doing annual reviews versus having regular ongoing feedback discussions? And then what kind of training do you give managers and how do you hold them accountable?
Okay, there's a lot. Let me see if I can get.
Yeah.
So look, we had every performance management process under the sun. When I talk about 28, we ran them at all different times of the year. We had every rating scale you could possibly invent, 1 to 5, 1 to 3, good, bad, poor, 1 through 10, I mean, you name it, we had it. And we knew that we were going to put it into success factors only to convert later. Okay, so we all agreed plain Jane vanilla, as plain as we could get it. So you could have 1 to 8 objectives, you set them in January, you close the review out on a 1 to 5 rating scale. And we encourage leaders to have, sort of quarterly check-ins. That was our sort of move towards kind of a more current modern day approach. But that didn't get legislated into the system because we were really trying to keep the process in success factors super simple, knowing we were going to have to rip and replace into Workday. And we didn't want to have to pay for a big second configuration on performance management. So we kept it pretty simple. That seems to have worked for us. I think we could do a better job executing the check-in process. That we've kind of had mixed reaction to, even though we could ask employees about, did you have a check-in with your manager? I think on manager capability through this, it was one of the reasons we stood up the learning management system early on, is we knew we were going to actually need a way to train everyone virtually, because we obviously didn't have the budget to go around the world and see all of our people managers. So we generally launched not only performance management training, but all the training for people managers through e-learning modules that then became required to complete in our learning management system.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question, I think is short and simple. What CRM did you implement?
Beamery we went with. And then we did a bake-off between a couple. That was the group. That was the team they chose. Don't ask me why.
Okay.
It was like at some point, there was a level of detail I wasn't into, but that was the one they felt like had the most functionality for the best price, and it was kind of already pre-packaged to integrate with Workday, I think, is what I recall the major reasons for why.
Okay, next question is somewhat related. If you could provide a little bit more information on why Workday over SuccessFactors.
Sure, they're really good. They're really good, both good platforms. And in the end, it was funny. We did we had a big process for this. But the HR team had a vote. We had business leaders involved. We had finance with a vote, and we had the IT teams looking at data security, infrastructure, controls around the sort of tech side. And I think what the HR team concluded was that we could run HR on either platform. And what was really the deciding difference in this, and when it came down to setting price aside, because we got those pretty close, but really, I think the IT teams made they were the tipping vote, if you will, in this case, because they were much more comfortable with the security architecture in Workday. So that's something you'll want to have if you're going to do a platform bake-off. I think you need all of those constituencies to have a voice and a process and hear from everyone. Because I was expecting it to make, if you'd asked me like, hey, which one were we going to pick and who's going to have the deciding vote, it would have been the HR team over some functionality we were going to debate endlessly for hours, but that wasn't the case. It was really the deciding vote came down to the IT team.
Okay, that's really helpful, because a question I get a lot is who should make those final votes, HR or IT? So I think it's not a totally simple answer. Everybody needs to be involved, but yeah, that's really helpful. So the next question is about your job architecture and comp redesign. They wanted to know where you got guidance on how to do that job architecture.
In the job architecture, well, first of all, I would say we dug up like an archaeological dig all the ones we had. And if there was a vendor who sold us a job architecture in 180 years, we bought that too. Okay, so we had job architectures from Hay, we had them from Mercer, we had them from Willis Towers Watson, we had them from local country vendors, and then we had, I would say, what I called like 25% of the world in the closet of curious collections. Like they weren't really official job architecture sold to us by a vendor, but they were, the local HR teams had some order to how they did things, but it wasn't like a true job architecture. And so one of the things we started to look at was, well, what did we have the most of? Did somebody sort of own us from a constituency standpoint? And the answer on that is we didn't really have anything that sort of seemed to be the right path forward. Having said that, the one we were on in the US had really good, strong science behind it, and had, although it had been, I would say, put in 15 years ago, had been pretty well maintained. I mean, certainly the wallpaper on it was out of date, but the science and the structure was good. So we sort of went looking for something that didn't disrupt the US, because it was half of our employee base, and on a reasonably good, well-maintained job architecture that could work. That sort of led us to work with Willis Towers Watson, who then was our partner in helping us figure out how to structure, how to renovate the US job architecture, because we were missing job families as we became a technology company. We probably had way too much complexity and spaghetti in our publishing job families, which we didn't have so many people in anymore. So we definitely renovated the US one and introduced, it didn't have like a particular band for sales. It didn't have a technology band. It had sort of your technical expert, which covered lots of different domain. And we really wanted to get much more crisper in how we looked at software developers. And then Willis Towers Watson helped us to do, and really the LOB led this activity, is, how are we going to crack the code on evaluating 10,000 other jobs at the time, and get those into a job architecture, train managers, talk to employees, and roll out that change. Most of that went through the LMS, as well as facilitated sessions by the line of business around the world.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's a lot of really useful detail there. And then the next question is, do you use competencies and competency modeling with your Workday implementation?
We didn't. We have a global leadership competency model that in the learning management system, if you're working on your development plan, that says, hey, I'm working on this thing. Here's the suggested sort of learning path. We're getting that. We had that clear in success factors. I think the teams are still working through making that easy in learning management, but we're not paying off of competencies. So there are some more sophisticated systems out there that were, maybe that's that level 4 maturity. We didn't get to those.
Okay. And then this listener is wondering how important skill management and talent marketplaces are on your agenda, and are you planning to design a skill architecture across your platforms?
We haven't talked about that. I think a lot of companies are there. Again, I think we're just trying to kind of stabilize all the things we launched and get through the pandemic, because definitely the pandemic probably took, I think, 40% of HR's capacity out of the system. So we're probably a good 2 years behind on our roadmap of where we'd like to be, given 2020 and 2021 have still had a large time of us, dedicating, supporting employees and the businesses through that. I think your next one was around sort of jobs, sort of what I would call getting to talent marketplaces, where you're sort of, I'm assuming that is you're bidding the work that needs to be done versus the job. I'm not actually sure I know what that means.
Yeah, I think so. Also, I hear this term used to talk about being able to kind of post work and jobs both internally and externally, so that you can bid work with your existing employees, as well as with perhaps contract workers.
In our sort of 0 to 3 level maturity model, there was the first, with Workday, was the first time we launched global job posting. So many of you are farther ahead of us than us. We're still trying to get employees to post on jobs that exist. So I think that will be farther out on our roadmap.
Okay, sure. And then what approaches have you taken to increase manager and employee direct access or self-service?
I think that's all work in progress right now because we can now see it and measure it. The employee usage of the portal, really, if you think about who uses what tool, what employees really access is the portal and payroll. They don't really do a lot of transactions in Workday unless they need to go change their home address, which probably doesn't happen very often. So I think one is being very segmented about who you're driving comms and training to. And we're pretty pleased with our levels of employee usage on the portal and the payroll portals that we've rolled as well. I think where our opportunity is on manager transactions around, hey, I can promote someone myself. I can move someone who reports to me. Now they're going to report to someone else. That is actually pretty complicated for a manager to do still in our system because of the different bonus plans, sort of spaghetti we work through, and some of our finance hierarchy. So we are, I think, trying to crack the code on why don't managers do it? Because it's confusing. And they call the HR person who sort of walks them through it. Because we have to actually back up to get to that level of process improvement to go forward again. So stay tuned, we'll have more lessons learned on that. But
Yeah,
I would say root cause analysis of why aren't managers using the system becomes really important. And then what's the process improvement you need to do to go out and then remarket it?
okay. Sure, sure. And then the next question is, was there resistance either from leaders or employees throughout this process?
I would say there was fatigue more than resistance. Certainly the CEOs, was saying to the CEOs, look, we're gonna, we figured out a way to not tax you on the financials. So technically the project, you're gonna get this project for free, but nothing in life is free. So they had historically a lot of control over their HR teams who did a lot of boutique, special divisional or BU specific work. And we were saying, hey, I was saying to them, you don't get to do that for the next 3 years if you want this on time, on budget. And if you pull the resources away and distract them, we will be late and then there will be a tax and I will be expecting you to pay the full load for everyone. But by the end, they were like, Maryjo, make it end, make it end. We were all tired by the end. So I would say certainly fatigue in ourselves and the HR team and the business of like, hey, just one more, like we got the PM and then we're gonna come back and do learning and like, oh, make it stop. So there's definitely fatigue. And I think we created a role. We have a lot of works councils in Europe. So we created a role in terms of changing that HR model to have one designated leader for works councils and really figuring out how to thread all of the works council pieces in a consistent way through all of the countries and works councils we had. And I think our works councils raised good questions. They're always actually some of our most engaged employees. So listening to them and to their concerns helped us actually anticipate and make things better. But they were definitely worried about the loss of the HR teams in country and getting them more comfortable with a more digital model of HR service. We definitely heard concern from them and had to keep coming back for, here and educating them on, this is market practice. This is how many HR people we have. This is what benchmark should be. No one is staying as high staffed as you may like it. And if we keep HR staffed so high, other functions need to take the pressure on the margin. And that's not fair. And we don't want to be not having enough salespeople because we have too many HR people. So just reminding them of the business case that we sort of simplified and shared.
Sure. I was curious too, there's a lot of change involved for the HR team, for your HR professionals. Have you done anything, to equip them for making these changes? Do you have any kind of career development for HR? What does that look like?
Well, there have been a ton of webinars and training. And what I think our message to the HR team was, if you're going to stay and have a career here, you're not using the latest technology. You're not on the latest best market practice systems that other companies are using. So you should see this as an investment, this whole transformation, not only in the function and in the business of Wolters Kluwer, but in you, because your skills need to come up to date on how to use this. And so we did everything under the sun, you know, webinars, learning management modules, you know, office hours. And so I think the HR teams would tell you they had enough training, but they needed time to learn to use it. And it was a lot at once at times. And that they would have appreciated that we could have paced it better. And my answer to that is, you know, this was sort of a business case that had to meet a certain hurdle rate, and there wasn't a lot of time to make it better, to pace it better if we were going to achieve the business case financials. And if we couldn't make that business case, it wasn't going to happen. And then we were living with sort of this really broken HR engine room in perpetuity.
Sure, sure. Well, I think we're about at the point of last question. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you measure success. What are whether it's qualitative or quantitative, what are the key things you look for to kind of see how your HR function is operating?
So what we measured success when I started and where we're at now is like an entire journey, and we could talk for another hour on that. We couldn't even pull a turnover report when I started. We didn't have the data, and we didn't have a consistent even definition or methodology or, you know, formulaic expression of that. Fast forward now, each team in HR, and particularly the COEs, have a dashboard of what is their dashboard on compensation, what is their dashboard of success on recruiting, what is the talent management dashboard of success, the service delivery dashboard of success. We have a data dictionary, so every metric we measure, we've written down how we calculate it. How does it actually work in Workday? Now, how do we think it works in Workday or PeopleDoc or any of the other tools? And we're now this year evolved towards, as we caught our breath coming out of the transformation in the pandemic, monthly operating reviews with each HR team where they're going through their dashboard in front of the whole HR leadership team, so we all know what their measures are, and then particularly the relevant ones out of that get shared back with the business. But it's been a real journey, is what I would say, and we're still on a learning curve.
Sure, sure. Well, we are out of time. I just want to say thank you so much. You have given so much, you know, great detail. I continue, as we've been going through the questions, I continue to see comments coming in that people are really grateful for the information you shared and saying this is a great presentation.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here with everyone today, and stay healthy, safe, and well still.
Yes. Yes, so I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Madison, who is going to be closing out the webinar. I do want to give you one note that we have a survey going on about the state of HR right now, how HR is doing in our new normal. So we will be in the follow-up email with the slides and the recording. We will also put a link to that survey, and love it if you would fill it out or pass it on to someone in your organization who might be able to answer those questions. So Madison, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa. In addition to the link to the survey, you'll also find some related resources to today's topic that are in APQC's resource library. If you have any additional questions for Maryjo or for Alyssa, please reach out to us. Her contact information will also be provided. And be sure and check out our human capital management expertise page for the latest research, and be sure and follow us on social. And when you close out the webinar, there will be a post-webinar satisfaction survey that appears. If you don't mind taking that, we really appreciate all the feedback, and we look to continually improve our webinars. Thank you for joining. Hope you have a great day.